Well, yes, I mean that's true, but that's actually already sort of a bit better than the less than 1 in 4 that voted for them at the general election, which just it just shows what a bad position they're in. And obviously, if 3 in 5 say they don't care, that is not a good thing. But I think they're also we've heard from Tom Tugendhat today. We heard from Robert Jenrick when he launched his speech. Priti Patel's been around. They've all been around giving interviews, but actually, I feel like they've been pretty quiet. That's partly because the media's not been, I think, that interested, as well as the public. But also, I think there was a sense that it was interesting that Tom Tugendhat was saying that, because I actually got the feeling that the Conservative leadership contenders were running quite scared of the riots when they first happened, and were having quite a tricky time with that.
Now, we are going to start or move on to the Tory leadership contest, because at Westminster today, former Security Minister and one of the contenders has given his first big speech focusing on the recent riots, criticising the Prime Minister's handling of the crisis. Well, Tom Tugendhat also used his speech to criticise the leader of Reform UK for amplifying false information. Well, speaking to me earlier, former Conservative MP, former Minister Paul Scully, who is not officially backing any of the candidates, told me what he hopes for the next Tory leader. Well, Tim, let me ask you first of all. Tom Tugendhat, pretty critical of the Prime Minister, far more so than we've heard from any other senior Tories so far.
Yeah, and I personally, Tom Tugendhat would be my choice for the next Tory leader. I think he's overall got the right balance of experience and vision. I wasn't convinced by this afternoon's speech, though, at all. I do think last week, and thank goodness the riots are over, hopefully for the long term, not just the short term, I thought there was something underpowered at times from Keir Starmer. I think a leader more comfortable with themselves, perhaps more comfortable with the office, would have been able to respond to the public mood better. I think they perhaps would have had something of a more of a charismatic response to what the country felt. But I find it difficult to fault a new Prime Minister on the substance. I think he basically took the right measures very quickly, postponing and then cancelling his holiday. We, of course, know that he was the director of prosecutions at the time of the last riots that we had. And I overall think in a very difficult situation, the government got hold of things very quickly. I think there are probably long-term challenges for the government in terms of integration of immigrants, getting immigration under control. But I don't think there was much to criticise Keir Starmer from. And I think the Conservative Party has to be careful when there's so many people unhappy with their own performance still, looking to criticise Labour quite so quickly. So it didn't quite work for me, actually.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of the wider problem for the Conservatives at the moment, isn't it, Scarlett? We've had that poll from Ipsos, which finds that 3 in 5 people actually don't care who becomes the next leader of the Conservatives. And maybe the first challenge for all the contenders is to make themselves relevant.
Well, yes, I mean that's true, but that's actually already sort of a bit better than the less than 1 in 4 that voted for them at the general election, which just shows what a bad position they're in. And obviously, if 3 in 5 say they don't care, that is not a good thing. But I think they're also we've heard from Tom Tugendhat today. We heard from Robert Jenrick when he launched his speech. Priti Patel's been around. They've all been around giving interviews, but actually, I feel like they've been pretty quiet. That's partly because the media's not been, I think, that interested, as well as the public. But also, I think there was a sense that it was interesting that Tom Tugendhat was saying that, because I actually got the feeling that the Conservative leadership contenders were running quite scared of the riots when they first happened, and were having quite a tricky time with that.
Yeah, I mean, do you think, perhaps it's not surprising at the moment people aren't interested in the leadership contest, Scarlett, especially because it's got a very long way to go, hasn't it?
It's got a very long way to go. People are never anywhere nearly as interested in individual politicians as people like us think they are. So name recognition for all these candidates is spectacularly low. The things people do know, they don't tend to like, and it's got a long way to run. People might start paying a bit more attention when it's down to the final two, but overall, I think the message of the election was that people were fed up of paying attention to the Conservative Party and are sort of welcoming the break.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's not such a bad thing, Tim. I mean, just looking at some of our listeners who've got in touch, Scott says, what on earth is Tugendhat talking about when it comes to Starmer? A load of utter nonsense, a wall of noise. As for the public mood, he did what needed to be done. And many people who've been getting in touch with us are a bit scathing about it. Perhaps, do you think that perhaps it's not such a bad idea that we've got this long Tory leadership contest going on, and that perhaps people aren't paying too much attention, because then perhaps when they finally do emerge with a new leader, the party might perhaps be in a better shape to form some sensible opposition, if you want the Tories to do that?
Is it, 5-6 weeks since the election? And the Conservative Party, my party, suffered a catastrophic defeat, the biggest defeat of it really since the Second World War. And at least up until now, I don't think I've heard any of the leadership contenders really give a full explanation of why. A really good account of saying, this is why we failed so badly, and this is what I think we need to do to begin to put it right. Some of them rushing immediately to a few big flagship policy ideas. Others are talking sensibly about party reorganisation. But at the moment, I don't think any of the candidates have reached a point where they'll be able to really say, someone can look at them from the public, those critical listeners you've just been quoting, Carol, and say, he gets it or she gets it. And so my hope with the long leadership contest is it may depress some of those people who don't want to hear about the Conservative leadership race. But I think my party clearly does still need time to have the answers, because none of the contenders really have them at the moment. So, of course, it may be wasted time. But my hope is that we need this marathon run, because none of them in these early stages of the sprinting have shown that they've got it.
I do think there's a question, though, of what happens in the meantime, and especially the role of Rishi Sunak in the meantime. And I appreciate that. Yeah, exactly. Well, quite.
Where's he been?
Exactly. But I appreciate that Parliament's been on recess. But, the news has been very dominant. And I think it's one thing to say that you're sort of being a caretaker leader, absolutely fine when you're handing over. But also there does need to be a voice of representing the opposition. And frankly, it's not been there. And actually, I think that's part of also what's been missing. It's all very well having the leadership contest. Yeah. I agree. I think the Conservative Party could do with quite a while to figure things out. But in the meantime, they also need someone who can sort of put forward what the party thinks as a whole, especially on issues that are so important, like the riots that we saw last week.
And Scarlett, I mean, what about the polls? We've seen a few polls of Tory members suggesting that Kemi Badenoch is still the favourite. Is there any sense that we've got as to who for the Tories might be their best prospect?
Well, as Tim will know, polling members is a very hard endeavour. It's a very difficult endeavour. They're often, not to do my own industry down, but it's very difficult to do. And I think especially this early on, it will be quite difficult to get a read with, where the contest will be. We don't know anything like the final two that we go in. You can make some educated guesses. In terms of the ones that the public most like, which is probably what the members may not be thinking of, but some of them may well be. But in terms of the ones the public most like, we've had some indication of that. It does seem to be they prefer people like Tom Tugendhat and James Cleverly. However, again, I think this whole thing is dominated by low name recognition, and actually there's an opportunity there for all of them to make an impression on the public, which sort of wins them over, because at the moment I think most people don't have a set opinion, again, except they're just not quite ready to think about the Conservatives again.
Yeah, I mean, just a reminder, of course, that we're going to go right through the party conference, and then the MPs will whittle it down to the final two, and then it will be the ordinary party members who make the final decision between the last two. Our listener's a bit scathing about that. Scott says he's not interested in the Tory leadership contest because ultimately it'll be decided by a cabal of right-wing pensioners who gave us trust and so on. Is there a problem in that, do you think, Tim?
All of the party memberships are to some extent unrepresentative by their nature. But I would defend the Tory members, really, actually.
Have all the leadership contenders.
They are older than the average, but actually, you look at the kind of person, Stryker, I may confirm this or not, but if you look at the kind of members, MPs that they choose, you think you get the stereotype is that they are sort of blue rinse, out of touch, etc. But again and again, they choose gay candidates, they choose black and ethnic minority candidates, much more than the average actually of a Labour constituency, Labour Party. They aren't this sort of prehistoric dinosaur sort of set of character. Their grandparents who know their children's problems. Now, ideally, you would, of course, have a demographically spread membership. But actually, one thing I really object to is the idea that they should lose the vote in favour of MPs. Well, if you look at why the Conservative Party got into trouble, it was the conduct of MPs, not the conduct of members. Members joined the party for no hope of getting any advantage. They do it because they believe in conservatism, they believe in the betterment of their local community. If anyone should have the vote in the election, it should be them, not the MPs. And remember, it was MPs that gave the members the choice of Sunak versus Truss. They, at the time, wanted, according to polls, they preferred that Tugendhat or Sajid Javid or Kemi Badenoch was shortlisted for them. They only had the shortlist of Truss versus Sunak, basically foisted upon them. So, yeah, as someone, when I set up Conservative Home, defended the right of members and managed to defeat Michael Howard's last attempt to take that away from them, I'm still on that position.
And Scarlett, in a way, it does help Keir Starmer, doesn't it? At least for the next few weeks and months. He's already had to face the riots. We're about to talk about some of the global challenges. There are questions over the economy, concerns about inflation. It does perhaps help him a bit that, for the time being at least, the opposition is in such disarray.
Yeah, and even though it's actually, I think it could be in more disarray, actually. We've not seen there've been sort of spats, but we've not seen them completely tearing themselves apart during this leadership contest. In fact, I would say less so than in some of the previous leadership contests we've had in recent years, especially that long summer one between Truss and Sunak. So, yes, I think it is better for Keir Starmer that all of the sort of Conservative protestant candidates are at the moment doing their bits for members. And whilst Keir, because he's got an incredibly tough in-tray. I think anyone who thought he wasn't going to have a tough in-tray was kidding themselves. And I think the election result actually confirmed that, despite the size of the majority. I think it's been sort of more dramatic than people might think, with the stuff you just referenced in the Middle East, with the riots, of course. But yes, it gives him some political space, I think, to deal with it. Although, again, he's going to come under pressure from his own party too, which, again, we've already seen.